All right, thank you very much once again for staying with TV3. This is NewDay. And right about now, we're going into an interview that has to do with the impact of politics on key sectors of the Ghanaian economy and whether or not politics has helped, or the fact that we allow politics to play in some of these key sectors or areas have helped the country in our stride of development. We are talking about health, education, and well, maybe we'll throw in one other key sector, but then these are the two key ones we are looking at. And this stems from a research that was conducted, or a survey that was conducted by the Center for Democratic Development, CDD, in partnership with two other key state institutions. And I've been joined in studio by Edward Ampratwum. He's a senior researcher with CDD. Good morning, sir. Thank you very much for joining us. I have gone through the reports, and I mean, what was given out as a report after the survey was conducted. And we want to find out, first of all, what's the rationale behind the decision to go and do this kind of research?
Thank you. Basically, this research is part of a broader research by the Effective States and Inclusive Development Forum. And this group of people are funded by DFID to undertake research that looks at the kinds of politics that promote development. And it's being done in 16 countries across the world, including Ghana, but it's led mainly from the University of Manchester. So CDD Ghana is one of the key partners in Ghana that was brought on this research to explore the kinds of politics that will bring about development. We've always had politics in various sectors of life, but we want to understand which kinds of these politics will bring about development. And that is what drove us into understanding or trying to understand this kind of phenomenon and how it brings about development.
Okay. And you said you did this as in CDD and some other partners did this. Can you help us know which institutions they are?
So in Ghana, we have the Ghana Center for Democratic Development as the key partner, but we have researchers at the University of Ghana Business School and the Institute of Social Statistical Research in the University of Ghana, who are also part of this research. Outside of Ghana, we have core key researchers at the University of Manchester. We have researchers also at the University of Cape Town, at the University of Harvard, all of them playing different roles. They are partners in Uganda and Bangladesh as well, who are all doing various aspects of this research, with the idea that we understand the politics and the kinds of politics that will bring about development.
Okay. Now the next question then would be, which kind of politics brings about development? We thought, I mean, there are those who think because we are in a democratic dispensation and there is multi-party democracy, it certainly would be the party that, you know, proposes a better agenda of development is the party that gets the power. Is that not the kind of politics that brings about development?
No. So in looking at this, the kinds of politics, we use the particular framework. See, in doing research, you can approach research from different frameworks. We use the framework called the political settlements. And in this framework, we're able to categorize politics into different types, where there's dominant political systems, where we have a competitive clientelistic politics, etc. Ghana, under the kind of framework we are using, falls into this competitive clientelistic, where there are different political groups who at various times have the opportunity to take power. And what we want to see is how this kind of arrangement, where there's a competitive process which allows for different parties to take power, how it shapes development. Because if you, and we've done this in comparison with countries like Rwanda, where, for instance, there's been one government for a very long time. How do this kind of political arrangements also shape politics compared to a place where we have the chance, for instance, to have political turnovers after 8 years and all those things? We want to see how this kind of arrangement shapes things differently from the other setup. And what we see is that in this kind of arrangement, the political arrangements thus actually have an impact on the kind of development. And for instance, I'll give you an example of what happens in education. And the case of education, for instance, you'll see that the political arrangements helps us to focus more on access versus quality.
Access versus quality.
More of access versus quality. Because you see that there's an urge to prove what you have. Okay? So if there were issues about, for instance, rationalizing teachers versus putting up school buildings, in Ghana, because showing the infrastructure will be easier than, for instance, moving teachers across, that will ruffle feathers with unions. We would go for the infrastructure. So we try to understand how these things play out.
Okay.
We're interested in, for instance, what kind of capacity the state will need to be effective. Okay? What would drive the elites in Ghana, for instance, to pursue quality versus quantity?
Good. And on that same score, I would want to find out what information did you get from the people that you asked, you researched. Did they tell you let's take for instance education, did they prefer quantity as to quality, or like the example you gave about moving teachers and rationalizing them and then also putting up infrastructure, which would they prefer? What did the electorates tell you?
No, so I would go back to, for instance, our methodology, which will help us to understand exactly what we did. So we did a lot of key informant interviews as well as document analysis at different levels. Now, in looking at reforms in education, for instance, going back all the way to as far back as 1995, looking at the FQ reforms, looking at the reforms in 2007, all the way, you'd see that there's a dominant role of politics in what decisions we make in education. In terms of the preference, you will not hear them say, we prefer quality over quantity. So what we are trying to do is, we want to understand what is driving them, because what our research is pointing us to is the fact that their behavior is showing that they are acting towards quantity versus quality. So they will not tell you they want it, but in actual fact, if you give them the chance, what are they doing? Which one is easier to accomplish? So we've tried to look at this over different facets. So for instance, we started with looking at reforms in education, all the education reforms we've done in Ghana since 1951. Going back, we've also narrowed in on teacher education reforms. What kind of reforms are being made pertaining to teachers? And more recently, we've looked at how decentralization reforms has, for instance, contributed to teacher accountability. And teacher accountability for us is one of the key indicators of quality. Okay? So here we're looking at whether teachers show up in school or they don't show up in school. Okay? So those are the things that our work is pointing us to see how the different governmental arrangements, the different state capacity, the different elites and coalitions, what role they are playing in promoting inclusive development.
And this cut across the country, right? What the catchment areas that you used, was it nationwide or specific regions?
So looking at from the first part of our work was a national level analysis, where we looked at key stakeholders at the national level. We further went down to some district level work where we focused on teacher attendance and performance in particular schools. And here we've been doing a lot of work in the central region. So the findings that pertains to school work and district work are mainly to specific districts in the central region, particularly the Trifu-Atimakwa district and then the Abra-Asebu-Kwamankese. And I must say that these districts, officials at district level and school level, have been very instrumental in our work, because we've been working with them since 2011. And the kinds of insights we got was only because we've been in those places for that long period, and that helped us to unearth a lot of these findings.
Now let's do specifics. Some of the key findings, and I'm going to read some of them from the research, then we can break it down further. For instance, how politics shapes the quality of education in Ghana. And one of the key findings says that Ghana's blend of multi-party competition and patron-client politics generates much stronger incentives to improve access to education than to improve the quality of education. The general failure to improve accountability in the education sector, particularly regarding the proportion of higher trained teachers who spend time on tasks, has led to poor educational outcomes that directly reflect how politics and governance work in Ghana. What's the meaning of that? It means what people are interested, or the willpower of the politicians as towards giving us better education as against, it brings out a debate of quality and quantity.
So a lot of these findings, we will be discussing them in our presentations tomorrow.
Okay.
But without going deep into it, the key conclusion in there, it's the point I made earlier about the role of politics in making decisions about, for instance, providing infrastructure versus rationalizing teachers. So what you see is the quest to focus on the visible. Okay, there's this fixation with the visible versus the soft. Okay, that is what we'll find, and we documented, we saw this through various reforms and the kind of reforms that are being implemented. Okay, that is what we see.
Okay.
For instance, the issue about, for instance, putting up school buildings, which will come up in most of the programs that they put across, versus pushing teachers and ensuring that teachers actually work. That's what you see.
Okay, so that's we will be crossing over to Studio A for news at 8:30, the news update at 8:30, and then when we come back, we'll delve deeper into this. But before we do that, though, there's this point that also says that Ghana's competitive clientelist settlement has tended to generate a high degree of policy incoherence and politicization within the education sector. How much of how much influence does politics generally have on education?
If you look at the education sector and decisions that are made, from our findings, and as I said, I don't want to go deep into it, but from our findings, you see that politics play a very key role. The key decisions about what should happen in education comes all the way from
the top,
the very top. Okay, and the previous arrangements where, for instance, the bureaucrats would come up with decisions about what to do, flowing back up. It's no longer the case. The decisions really come from the top because it's very important. It's now like it's education is a thing.
The pivot of development.
So now all the decisions come up from the top, and that is what sometimes lead to the policy coherence. For instance, in 2007.
So the top may have an agenda, but that may be different from what may pertain or what the final person on the ground may be looking forward to.
So let me give you the example of what happened in 2007.
With the interest of what really is needed at the base and where the final result is expected.
Okay, so let me give you an example of what happened in, for instance, 2007, where there was a reform launched by the president as far back, and then there was work also spearheaded largely through the donors in the Ministry of Education on the education strategic plan. Okay, now those reforms are on one side that was taxed by the president direct. And then these reforms were also taking place, or these strategy plans were also done at the ministry. Now, what you see is that over time, you see the overbearing role of the Presidential Commission's report over the strategy plan that was put at the ministry.
Okay.
So you see that though, and the normal procedure would have been that, for instance, the Ministry of Education would have their strategic plan, and that would be the overriding process. But what you saw was that the executive felt it needed to take the lead, and so you'd have these parallel things taking place, and these are the ones that
And what did you find out with such conflicts of policies and its implementation, what did you find that the one from the very top almost always supersedes, and how does that affect the final outcome?
Okay, so what we found was that the executive work always supersedes what the strategy is, and these have implications for implementation of one, like in terms of release of resources towards the program. Okay, so what has been set up for by the Presidential Commission would have more funding, would have more focus than what the bureaucrats have like designed
outlined
to be done.
Okay.
Yes, but when we go into our presentation of findings, we would give very detailed examples of how these things play out and how they undermine. See, they undermine the focus on quality and then play to the focus on quantity.
Let's also look at the, you mentioned the overbearance of political influence on final decisions or decisions that affect either the electorate or maybe information you gathered from your respondents. We want to find out, does the longevity of a particular political administration influence the finality of a policy or the implementation of a policy? So if you have a 3-year period of an administration as against another country that has a 5-year one term and ours that is a 4-year one term, which from your research do you think that is able to bring results that are quite visible and also important?
Yeah, so what your question is seeking to try to do comparative work with, for instance, Ghana and Uganda.
Yeah.
Or Ghana and Rwanda. But let me give you an idea of what our work is pointing to. Now, what we're seeing is that the competitive nature of our politics, in terms of the fact that within 4 years, the programs you do, the policies you put up, would you have this potential to either stay or go. It's what is making our political actors act in a way or drive them to focus on things that everybody must see. Okay? It's that process that is affecting the long-term nature of bringing about quality education and inclusive development. That is what we see. We see that competitive clientelist position is making us act more short-term rather than aiming at the long-term to get the results.
So then again on that question, does that then mean that information you've gathered clearly states that it would be better for a national agenda on maybe education, health, which is long-term in nature, and every other political party, be it 1 term or 3 term or 6 term, would follow suit and have to implement what is in that policy document?
No, our work hasn't explored that angle, so I wouldn't want to speak to that angle. But our work is pointing to the fact that the way the
style of politics we run here,
the type of politics and the competitive nature of the politics is affecting the focus on the long term and undermining like quality of education and pushing more for quantity and access to education. Okay.
Let's go to health now. You mentioned in some of the key findings that the inequitable allocation of resources and distribution of health workers is linked to deepening regional inequalities, thereby inferring that politicians prefer to spread resources thinly to increase their influence on voters rather than focus on more deprived areas.
Yes.
Kindly explain.
So, and as I sit here, I'm mainly deep into the education side and the health.
Okay.
But mainly that finding is pointing again to the competitive nature of our politics and the focus on the visible versus what is soft and can generate longer term outcome. What that finding is showing is that because of the focus of our politics and the competitive nature of our politics, there is a spread on very, like, at a thing level, okay? So, for instance, I would go to places up north, and especially in Upper West, where there's an effort to put up chip compounds in many places, okay? So the chip compounds are there, but there are no people to man them, okay? So the idea is, okay, I've done the chip compounds, but in terms of who will man the chip compounds,
the running of it,
that one doesn't, it doesn't sell, that one doesn't fetch votes. But the fact that the chip compound is there, it's the focus. That is how it is. And these are actually also affecting issues about inequality. For instance, when it comes to spreading of doctors and nurses into very deprived areas. I was in a place called Fonsi in the Wa East district. And you'd find no doctor in this whole place. And you'd find doctors virtually haggling together in Kumasi and Accra, when there are no spaces, and it's because of the difficulties of the political arrangements, we are unable to push them or to tell them, okay, let's rationalize, let's move people up. It's difficult.
Okay.
But but when it comes to, for instance, putting up the buildings to show that, look, I said I'll build 100 bed room.
I've done that. But
for everybody, I've done it.
So what is this research intended to achieve?
So this research, one, is meant to show us the kinds of politics that bring development. It means if you do, for instance, a competitive clientelistic politics, you're going to get certain outcomes that in the short term might bring something that looks like development, but in the longer term might undermine exactly what you call your development. Again, we want to see what capacities the state requires to be effective.
Okay.
What drives certain state actors, certain elites to promote development in one way versus the other. We want to understand how these things play out. Those are the things that this research is helping us to understand. So that in terms of future work and policy implications, we begin to reorder things, okay? So that we'll do the politics, but the politics must bring about development. And again, the politics must ensure that the development is inclusive, so that there's not development there, but it's development that reduces inequalities, development that ensures a lot of equity in distribution of goods to everyone.
Okay. All right. We know that the launch will be when tomorrow.
Yes.
Yes, and then just give us a few details on that, and then we'll be wrapping it up here. So
for this program that is being done in Ghana, we are starting off with a presentation today at the Gimpa Moot Court, where we're doing a presentation on public sector reform, looking at the challenges of public sector reform. Okay. Again, we will follow that up with a presentation at CDD Ghana tomorrow, where there are two sessions. There's a session on growth and inclusive development, and the natural resource governance and inclusive development. In the afternoon, we are looking at health, service delivery, and education.
Okay.
Yes. And on Wednesday, we have a panel discussion that looks at challenges of transformation in Ghana, and that will take place at the ISA conference room. Yes, at the University of Ghana. But that will take place in the afternoon. But tomorrow we have the morning session that starts from 9 to 12, and then there's 2 to 5.
Afternoon session. All right, thank you very much. We've been speaking with Edward Ampratwum. He is a research fellow, senior researcher at the Center for Democratic Development, CDD. Now, CDD, in partnership with ESID, University of Manchester, University of Ghana Business School, and ISA, put together a research, or conducted a research that was weighing the impact of politics on development and which kind of politics brings development, and details of that is also on our website, or you can go to the CDD website and get details of it. But they're launching it actually tomorrow, although there is a program today at Gimpa. That'll be it for this segment. Thank you very much, and we hopefully in the next few days we'll see what kind of research brings about, what kind of brings about development, and we'll let you know about that in our bulletins. This is New Day on TV3 with